The automatic glass doors of the Grand Meridian Hotel glided open with a gentle whisper, releasing a rush of cool, lavender-scented air that wrapped around Clara Reynolds like a memory from a forgotten life. She stepped inside quietly, her worn canvas sneakers almost silent against the polished marble floor, marble that gleamed with the quiet arrogance of something that cost more per square foot than most families spent on rent each month. The irony clung to her like a second skin. Here she was, walking into one of the city's most elite five-star sanctuaries, dressed like a woman who had just stepped off a Greyhound bus. Her faded jeans bore the creases of long nights and long roads, and her navy cardigan, once a favorite, hung from her shoulders like an old friend who'd seen too much. A tattered backpack sagged against her spine, its frayed edges whispering stories of airports, bus stations, and too many hotel rooms. Clara paused in the grand lobby, the kind of pause that isn't really hesitation, but a recalibration. She knew this space. Knew it intimately, actually. She had overseen every inch of it. And yet, today it all felt strangely foreign. Above her, crystal chandeliers shimmered like frozen fireworks, casting fractured light across gold-leafed walls that curled with the kind of elegance only money could buy. Fresh white orchids bloomed in hand-blown glass vases, their scent mingling with the trace notes of expensive cologne and Italian leather. It was the kind of luxury that whispered, not shouted, a refined opulence meant to awe and intimidate in equal measure. This was the place where billion-dollar deals were inked over $100 0-cents cocktails, where celebrities disappeared from the headlines behind velvet curtains, and where power disguised itself in fine linen and polished shoes. But today, Clara wasn't here as the woman behind the empire. No press, no assistant, no designer suit, just Clara, the traveler. A role she hadn't played in years. And yet, it was more than a role. It was a test. The past 3 months had dragged her into countless sleepless nights, each one echoing with complaints that cut sharper than any boardroom betrayal. Guest satisfaction had plunged, and with it, the credibility of everything she had built. The words on the reviews were all the same, and each one hit like a blade. Dismissive staff, judgmental looks, cold welcome. Guests didn't feel like royalty anymore. They felt like intrusions. That reality gnawed at Clara's core. She had built this world on one simple, powerful belief: that everyone, regardless of their bank balance, race, attire, or accent, deserved to feel seen, respected, and cared for. It was a belief that had carried her from a forgotten diner in a dusty town to this cathedral of luxury. And now, that vision was slipping through her fingers. At the front desk, a young woman with platinum blonde hair and a polished smile looked up. Her name tag read Jessica. In a glance that was almost invisible to the untrained eye, Jessica scanned Clara's clothes, her backpack, her unassuming posture. And just like that, her smile tightened by a degree. "Good evening. Welcome to the Grand Meridian. Do you have a reservation?" The pause before "you" was subtle, but Clara caught it like a slap in a silent room. "Yes, Reynolds, Clara Reynolds." Her tone was neutral, even friendly. She watched Jessica's manicured fingers dance across the keyboard with robotic precision. "Ah, one night, standard queen room. I'll need a credit card and ID for incidentals." The transaction was smooth, but Clara felt it in the air, the way Jessica's attention kept drifting to others. A sharply dressed man was greeted with warmth, offered help before asking. An elderly woman in pearls received assistance with her luggage without even lifting a finger. By the time Clara stepped into the elevator, headed for the 7th floor, she felt the weight of her dual identity pressing hard against her ribs. Technically, she owned 60% of this hotel, though few would ever know. She had chosen to remain in the shadows, by design, and now this anonymity was her armor, her lens into the truth. The room was pristine, silent, sterile, But her mind wouldn't rest. She lay in bed, turning over spreadsheets of plunging revenue, the rise of one-star reviews, and the bitter taste of broken standards. This wasn't just a hotel. It was a reflection of her values. And somewhere along the line, that reflection had cracked. At 6:00 a.m., the alarm rescued her from restless dreams. By 6:45, she was back in her same clothes, hair tied up, face bare. She walked into the breakfast lounge not as a founder or CEO, but as just another woman looking for coffee. The room buzzed with the energy of early ambition. Clattering plates, the hiss of espresso machines, polite chatter, the faint scent of bacon and fresh pastries. Clara chose a small table by the window and quietly observed. Years in the industry had trained her to see what others missed: the warmth of a good host, the indifference of a tired one, the moments that made a guest feel invisible. That's when she saw him. Bryce Morrison stood behind the coffee station like a self-appointed gatekeeper. Mid-20s, sharp jawline, expensive watch, and a carefully styled haircut that probably took longer than Clara's entire morning routine. He was handsome in that smooth magazine ad way, but there was something off. His eyes swept the room, not with curiosity but with judgment. Cold, fast, calculating. Clara's stomach tightened. She had seen that look before. In the early years, in boardrooms, in interviews, men who thought they could decide someone's worth with a glance. And in that moment, Clara knew. Her quiet mission was about to become something far more personal. The contrast was unmistakable. The elderly gentleman in the tailored Armani suit received Bryce's broadest smile, complete with a charming laugh and an enthusiastic rundown of the chef's hand-picked specials. A young couple in matching designer gym wear were met with compliments, playful banter about their post-workout glow, and offers of curated fruit plates. Bryce's demeanor shifted effortlessly, like a seasoned actor slipping into character for an admiring audience. But then his gaze landed on Clara, and something changed. His face didn't betray open hostility, but it didn't need to. His eyes swept over her cardigan, the kind of knit one finds in thrift stores, rich with history and poor in cost. Then her faded jeans and practical ponytail, ending at the frayed backpack resting at her feet like an exhausted companion. Bryce's jaw tensed. Clara saw it. She'd been in rooms where billion-dollar mergers were made with a smile and destroyed with a glance. This wasn't new to her. But that didn't dull the sting. From her seat, she couldn't make out the words he muttered under his breath, but she didn't need to. His expression was loud enough. A mix of condescension and mild revulsion, like he'd discovered something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Still, she remained composed. She always had. Clara had learned long ago that power didn't scream. It observed. It waited. She rose, calm as lake water, and approached the coffee station. Bryce, now busy refilling pastries at a deliberately slow pace, didn't bother acknowledging her presence until she spoke. "Excuse me," Clara said, her voice soft but firm, like silk stretched over steel. "Could I trouble you for a coffee refill?" Bryce glanced up, eyes crawling over her once again. There was a pause, just long enough to establish dominance. Then came the words, loud, sharp, and unapologetically cruel. "This isn't a soup kitchen, lady." The room didn't fall silent. No cinematic hush. No dropped forks or gasps. The world kept turning. Coffee cups clinked. Conversations drifted lazily through the air. But inside Clara, the axis of her world shifted violently. She stood there, her grip tightening slightly on the handle of her mug. The insult didn't need repetition. It hung in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't yet begun to rage. Bryce returned to his task with smug satisfaction, the kind of expression people wore when they believed they'd restored order. But Clara didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply stood, the heat of embarrassment flickering beneath the surface, tempered by something colder, older, something forged in years of being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. She'd built an empire while men like Bryce mocked her ambition. She didn't need to prove anything to him, not here. Not yet. Across the room, a man in a gray janitor's uniform pushed a maintenance cart with quiet, practiced precision. He wiped surfaces with care, checked bins with discipline. To most, he was invisible. But his name was Marcus Duval, and Marcus had seen everything. To the staff of the Grand Meridian, Marcus was a soft-spoken cleaner, his uniform plain, his baseball cap pulled low. But behind the disguise stood a man who controlled a multi-billion-dollar hospitality empire. He didn't just own a stake, he held the reins. Every chandelier above their heads, every tile beneath their feet belonged to him. No one in the breakfast lounge knew that the man emptying their trash was the controlling force behind 47 properties across 12 countries. No one knew he'd been slipping in and out of his hotels for 3 years, conducting silent audits disguised as maintenance shifts. After a rival chain crumbled under the weight of a discrimination scandal, Marcus had vowed never to let the same rot infect his brand. This morning had started like all others, an early check-in with his real supervisor, a clipboard, a mop, and a mission. The breakfast area was his favorite to observe. Morning revealed the soul of a hotel. How staff treated guests before caffeine and smiles had fully settled in was the true test. So when he heard Bryce's words, "This isn't a soup kitchen, lady," Marcus froze. He'd heard rudeness before, even occasional indifference, but this was something darker. A violation not just of policy, but of principle, delivered with a smirk. Bryce Morrison, ambitious, charming, beloved by some, had just crossed a line Marcus hadn't known existed until it was shattered. And then there was Clara. She didn't react with fury. No demands, no raised voice. She simply stood there, her silence thunderous. Her body held a stillness that Marcus recognized, a calculated quiet, like a chess player baiting an opponent. Her dignity remained intact. More than that, she wore it like armor. Marcus timed his steps to meet her departure, reaching the heavy door between the breakfast area and the lobby just as she approached. Without breaking character, he held it open. "Thank you," Clara murmured. Her eyes met his. Just for a second. But something passed between them. Recognition without context. Two people who had seen too much to let this moment fade into background noise. She nodded. He nodded back. But behind those nods lived intent. As she walked toward the elevators, Marcus noticed the purposeful way she moved, neither hurried nor shaken. Her hand brushed her phone. Her thumbs flew across the screen in tight, efficient motions. Not texting, logging. She was building a case. Back at his cart, Marcus couldn't concentrate. His mind swirled with thoughts. Who was she really? Her response had been too deliberate, too strategic. He'd seen CEOs flinch under less fire. But Clara? She absorbed the hit, calculated the damage, and walked away taller. And Bryce, poor arrogant Bryce, had no idea the hurricane he had just summoned. The breakfast lounge buzzed on, oblivious. But 2 silent storms had already begun forming, each powerful, deliberate, and closing in on collision. And as Clara returned to her seat, the next scene unfolded. Bryce approached an elderly man with a soft accent and a kind smile, who politely asked, "Excuse me, young man, what is artisanal sourdough with house-churned butter? I just want normal bread and butter, please." Bryce's smirk returned, and Clara's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, because now it wasn't just about her. It was about all of them. Bryce's response came with an exaggerated sigh so loud it rippled through the breakfast area like a judgmental echo. 3 tables away, guests turned their heads. "Sir," he began, drawing out the word with theatrical patience, "this is a 5-star establishment. not a roadside diner. He didn't stop there. Our artisanal sourdough is handcrafted by our executive pastry chef using a century-old starter imported from San Francisco, and the house-churned butter, made fresh daily from organic cream sourced from a sustainable farm in Vermont. His words, heavy with pretentious detail, were delivered in the tone adults reserve for misbehaving children. It wasn't just an answer. It was a performance meant to humiliate. The elderly gentleman nodded, smiling gently, unaware of the scorn woven into the explanation. "So, bread and butter," he repeated, hopeful and sincere. "Yes," Bryce muttered with a roll of his eyes so dramatic it seemed rehearsed. He turned toward Ashley at the omelet station and, without attempting to lower his voice, mimicked the guest. "Bread and butter?" From her corner, Clara's stomach tightened. This was no longer subtle. It was systemic. She unlocked her phone, pretending to check messages. In reality, her fingers were flying across the Notes app, timestamping every line of Cruelty. 7:42 a.m. Employee mocks guest's accent, shows contempt for reasonable request. Behavior reflects systemic disrespect for international visitors. Moments later, her disbelief twisted into nausea. As the elderly man walked away, Bryce leaned toward Ashley with the smugness of a schoolyard bully. "These people come to a place like this and expect McDonald's service," he sneered. "Maybe he should try the Holiday Inn down the street. I hear they've got pictures on the menu." Ashley chuckled, trying to stifle her amusement. At least he didn't ask for directions to McDonald's like that family yesterday. Bryce laughed louder. "Oh God, yes. Did you see what they were wearing? The dad's shirt had holes in it. There should be a dress code for guests, not just staff." Clara's fingers moved faster. 7:44 a.m. Staff, mocking guest appearance. Open disdain for economic status. Discussion of discriminatory dress codes. Hostile environment for budget-conscious travelers. But Bryce wasn't done. A middle-aged woman in a floral dress approached the station next. Clara didn't need to hear a word to know she'd already been assessed. Her shoes were sturdy, chosen for comfort. Her purse, though clean, was worn with years of use, and Bryce's expression shifted with practiced cruelty. "Excuse me," the woman said kindly. "Is there any chance I could get some hot water for tea?" "I brought my own bags." A reasonable request, simple, human. But Bryce responded as though she'd just demanded champagne on tap. "Ma'am, we offer premium imported teas from across the globe," he said, puffing up his chest. "Earl Grey from England, green tea from Japan, chamomile from Germany. Surely one of our curated selections would be preferable to whatever you brought." The woman's smile dimmed. "I'm sure they're lovely, but I have a specific herbal blend. It's for digestion. My doctor recommended it." The word digestion seemed to trigger Bryce's disdain even further. "Well," he said with faux sympathy, "I suppose we can accommodate special dietary needs. Ashley, could you get some hot water for our guest with the medicinal tea?" He may as well have called it a prescription for embarrassment. As the woman walked away, flustered but polite, Bryce delivered his final jab. "Real guests don't bring their own tea bags to a 5-star hotel," he declared. "Next thing you know, they'll be sneaking in their own coffee and asking us to microwave leftovers. Seriously." Ashley giggled. "It's like they think this is their grandmother's kitchen. The thrift store crowd just doesn't get hospitality," Bryce concluded, nodding like a man proud of his insight. And that was it. Clara rose. Her movements were precise, measured. She'd gathered enough. She walked to the front desk, where a new shift had taken over. The woman behind the counter had the calm confidence of a seasoned professional. Her name tag read Michelle Torres. Clara approached, maintaining the same quiet demeanor she'd used all morning. But now, she was stepping into a new role, the concerned guest, the observer stepping out of the shadows. "Excuse me," she began. "I wanted to mention an experience I had during breakfast. It was a little uncomfortable." Michelle's face shifted into the well-practiced look of corporate empathy. "I'm so sorry to hear that. Could you tell me what happened? Clara kept her tone even. No anger, just the facts. When I asked one of the staff for a simple coffee refill, he responded by saying, "This isn't a soup kitchen." She paused. I've stayed in many hotels. I've never encountered a response like that. Michelle blinked. For a moment, Clara hoped for shock, for accountability, but instead, Michelle exhaled, her expression softening into something familiar. "Oh, that would be Bryce," she said with an almost fond tone. "I'm sorry if his sense of humor caught you off guard. That's just Bryce. He has a very sharp wit. Some guests don't always get his personality, but he's actually one of our most popular staff. The regulars love him." The words stung more than the insult itself. This wasn't about one bad employee. It was a culture, a failure in the foundation, an unspoken code of silence that allowed men like Bryce to thrive. "Sharp sense of humor," Clara repeated softly. Michelle smiled, clearly missing the undercurrent in Clara's voice. "He keeps things lively during breakfast. Our VIPs especially enjoy his commentary. He knows how to read a room." Clara's phone buzzed. She typed, "7:52 IM management fully aware of discriminatory behavior. Dismisses concerns as personality quirk. Systemic leadership failure." From across the lobby, Marcus Duval pushed his cart past the front desk, catching just enough of the exchange to piece together the full picture. He'd seen this story play out before. Protective managers shielding toxic employees out of familiarity, fear, or worse, indifference. But Clara? Clara wasn't reacting like a wounded guest. She was analyzing, recording, constructing something bigger than a complaint. And suddenly, Marcus knew. Bryce and Michelle hadn't just made a mistake. They'd triggered a reckoning, and Clara Reynolds was about to rewrite the rules of the entire hotel industry. A crisp voice echoed through every hallway, kitchen, and back corridor of the Grand Meridian Hotel. "All hotel staff report to the Grand Ballroom immediately for a mandatory meeting called by regional headquarters. This includes all departments: housekeeping, food service, front desk, maintenance, and management. No exceptions." The announcement cut through the building like a razor, slicing through routines and chatter. In the breakfast area, which had slowly transitioned into its quieter afternoon phase, Bryce Morrison groaned audibly, snapping a plastic lid onto a pastry tray with unnecessary force. "Seriously?" he muttered with exaggerated frustration. "Another one of these corporate dog and pony shows. What is this, the third one this quarter?" Ashley rolled her eyes as she wiped down the coffee station. I know, right? Let me guess, another drone lecture about hospitality excellence and guest satisfaction metrics." She made air quotes around the buzzwords, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I swear the regional suits must have loyalty cards for their private jets." "Last time," Bryce recalled with a scoff, "it was that HR woman droning on about unconscious bias for 2 hours. His fingers mimed quotation marks again, more aggressively this time. "Like I need corporate telling me how to do the job I've been doing better than anyone else for years." As housekeeping staff filed past, carrying carts and caddies, some murmured their agreement. Eye rolls and groans rippled through the ranks like a silent rebellion. But not everyone joined in. Marcus Duval, still wearing his maintenance uniform, watched the reactions with a sharpened eye. To him, this wasn't just indifference, it was rot. And this time, it wasn't just cultural commentary, it was poetic irony, because Bryce Morrison had no idea that the corporate overreaction he was mocking had his own name on it. "I bet it's about the new guest survey results," Bryce continued smugly as he pulled off his apron. "Michelle mentioned something about low feedback scores, but come on, some people just don't get quality service." Ashley nodded. "Like that woman this morning," she chimed. "Thrift store cardigan all huffy about your perfectly reasonable comment. Some guests just don't understand the standards of a place like this." Bryce chuckled darkly. "I bet this whole meeting's because of people like her." writing fake reviews because they feel out of place. I mean, really. Some folks just don't belong in a 5-star setting. Marcus turned toward the service elevator, hiding his tightening jaw behind a neutral expression. He felt the quiet thunder of what was coming. He only wished Bryce knew that the woman he was mocking had her words, and his, archived with time-stamped precision, waiting to be deployed in front of a crowd he wouldn't be able to charm. The grand ballroom filled quickly. Servers in wrinkled aprons, housekeepers still carrying rags and vacuums, front desk staff tapping at phones, all settled in with the unspoken agreement that this would be another corporate lecture they'd suffer through. Bryce dropped into a middle row with his clique of food service co-workers. They whispered jokes, rolled their eyes at buzzwords, and placed bets on how long the meeting would drag. At the front of the room, Michelle Torres sat with the other department heads, her face set in a managerial mask of readiness and faint irritation. Marcus stood quietly at the side, still in uniform, invisible by choice. Then Clara entered. No one noticed her at first. Just another face in the sea. Still wearing that simple cardigan, still carrying that old backpack. She took a seat near the back. But her presence carried a subtle charge, like the air before a storm. At exactly 4:00 p.m., the doors closed with a final echoing click. Conversations died mid-sentence, and then Marcus Duval stepped forward. The man who had pushed trash bins and wiped tables now stood in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Gone was the baseball cap. His hair was sleek, his presence transformed. He wore a watch worth more than a year of staff salaries, but it was his eyes, sharp, calm, and commanding, that stunned the room into complete silence. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice resonating without a microphone. "For those who don't know me, my name is Marcus Duval. I am the Chief Executive Officer and Principal Investor of the Meridian Hotel Group." You could hear a pin drop, not a respectful quiet. A stunned silence that came from complete mental shutdown. Bryce went pale. Ashley froze mid-sip of her water. Michelle looked like she'd been unplugged from reality. Marcus continued, calm as a surgeon in an operating room. "Over the past 24 hours, I've been conducting an undercover audit of this property. Some of you saw me clearing tables and changing trash bins. I assure you, it was all quite intentional." Eyes darted toward where Marcus had stood earlier in uniform. Whispers flared. Recognition dawned like slow-moving thunder. "During this audit," Marcus said, "I witnessed behaviors that violate every principle this company was built upon. Discrimination, cruelty, arrogance, a culture of enabling misconduct disguised as personality." He paused, his gaze scanning the crowd, letting the silence swell. "But I was not alone." He gestured toward the back. "I'd like you to meet my partner in this evaluation, Clara Reynolds, co-owner of this property and fellow witness to this morning's events." Clara rose. No dramatic wardrobe change, still the same simple clothes, but everything about her posture had shifted. There was nothing meek or humble about her now. She walked to the front with the grace of someone who knew the building's blueprints, because she had helped design them. No one laughed. No one whispered. The quiet had turned into something weightier. Dread. Bryce's mouth moved, but no sound came. His skin now matched the sickly green hue of the ballroom's accent lights. Around him, his co-workers recoiled. Not just from him, but from everything they'd been complicit in. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet. The screen glowed, alive with damning footage. "Before we move forward," he said, "it's important we all see what's really happening under this roof." He tapped the screen. The ballroom's projection system flared to life. Where there should have been a PowerPoint, there was now a surveillance video. Crystal clear footage of that morning's breakfast service. Timestamp, 7:35 a.m. The screen showed Bryce, smirking as he scanned the room. It showed his dismissive posture, his mocking gestures, his open contempt. Then came Clara, approaching the coffee station with quiet grace, her voice soft, respectful, asked for a refill. And Bryce's voice cut through the silence. "This isn't a soup kitchen, lady." A collective inhale swept through the ballroom like a cold front. And as the footage continued, Bryce mocking accents, laughing at guests' clothes, humiliating a woman with medical needs, Marcus looked up, meeting every eye in the room. The reckoning had arrived, and it was only just beginning. The words, "This isn't a soup kitchen, lady," hung in the air like a guillotine. They echoed with such brutal clarity that you could almost hear the moral temperature in the ballroom plummet. Several employees gasped aloud. Others shifted in their chairs, a quiet unease crawling over them as the realization set in. They might be next. But Marcus wasn't done. The footage rolled on, each frame a mirror that no one wanted to look into. Bryce's dismissive sneers, his mockery of the elderly man's accent, the whispered cruelty he shared with Ashley, his every smirk, every shrug. It all played out in sharp digital truth. There was no misinterpretation, no room for excuses. I was just, Bryce stammered, finally cracking under the weight of his collapsing world. That wasn't, she wasn't. Marcus's voice cut in like a blade. She wasn't what, Mr. Morrison? He asked, ice in his tone. She wasn't deserving of dignity, of respect, of being treated like a human being because her clothes didn't match your idea of worth. The room went dead still. The screen now showed Michelle Torres, dismissive, smiling, brushing off Clara's concerns like lint off a lapel. Her words about Bryce's sharp wit and entertaining commentary sounded toxic in the cold light of public accountability. Marcus paused the video and turned to face the room. His expression, grave but calm, carried the weary determination of a man who had built something meaningful and now stood on the edge of watching it rot from within. 23 years ago, I opened my first hotel, he began, his voice low but resonant. Not because I loved buildings, not because I craved wealth, but because I believed in one thing, that every guest who walks through our doors deserves to feel valued. Not just the wealthy, not just the stylish, everyone. He gestured toward the frozen image on screen. What you've just witnessed is a complete abandonment of that principle. This isn't just poor service, this is discrimination, systemic, casual, and covered by excuses dressed up as personality. Beside him, Clara remained silent but powerful. She no longer needed to speak. Her presence was a statement all its own. A woman once mocked, now standing center stage as a co-owner, an authority, and an embodiment of grace under fire. Marcus turned to Bryce. His voice softened, but his words hit harder. "Mr. Morrison, your employment with the Meridian Hotel Group is terminated, effective immediately." The room sucked in a breath. "And Ms. Torres, your supervisory position is also terminated. You will both be escorted off the property within the hour." Bryce looked as if he'd been punched. His carefully curated facade crumbled, leaving behind a pale, desperate man on the verge of panic. "Please, Mr. Duval, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," Marcus replied. "Your behavior has explained everything." Ashley Chin, who had been trying to melt into her seat, let out a small, broken sob. "Ashley," Marcus continued, his gaze firm but not unkind, "your participation in this morning's actions disqualifies you from continued employment here as well." A ripple of fear passed through the remaining staff. Some exchanged glances, others looked down at their shoes. The unspoken question was everywhere. Have I failed this standard too? Marcus gave them no false comfort. "This is not about punishment," he said, his voice steady. "This is about accountability, about remembering who we are. Hospitality is not a business of perfection, but it is a business of compassion. When we lose that, we lose everything." For the first time, Clara spoke. Her voice was warm, deliberate, and carried the weight of lived experience. "What happened this morning," she said, "wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a culture that forgot what it was here to do." And we're not here to blame. We're here to rebuild. Marcus nodded. Security will escort the terminated individuals out. HR will finalize their compensation and departure details. For the rest of you? He paused, letting the moment settle. We begin again tomorrow. As the doors opened and uniformed security entered, Bryce stood, wobbling slightly. His eyes were hollow, his pride bleeding out of him with every step. The confident man who had once policed a breakfast room with cruelty now looked like a boy lost in the halls of power. For the first time that day, Clara allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Justice wasn't always loud, but when it came, it was felt. 1 week later, the Grand Meridian's breakfast lounge looked like a different universe. Gone was the tension, the wary glances. In its place was a hum of respectful energy. Servers moved with purpose and warmth. Guests were greeted like neighbors, not judged like intruders. The air smelled not just of fresh croissants, but of transformation. Clara stood at the entrance, not in thrift store garb, but in the smart, elegant style of a businesswoman who had earned her place at the helm. She wasn't here undercover anymore. She was here as herself. That Monday she had introduced herself to the remaining team formally this time. No disguises, no tests. "Good morning," she had said. "I'm Clara Reynolds, co-owner of this hotel and your new director of guest experience, and I am not here to fire anyone else. I'm here to rebuild with you." And she meant it. In the days that followed, the staff were retrained, not just on policies but on purpose. Anonymous feedback channels were introduced. Guest commentaries were reviewed every night. And for the first time in years, morale didn't feel like a buzzword. It felt like hope. At a table near the window, an elderly guest with a soft accent smiled warmly as a young server brought him exactly the toast he had asked for. With a side of compassion, Clara watched quietly. Change had arrived. Not with a press release, not with a grand rebranding, but with truth and accountability. There may not be a doubt that in the wake of depression, the carnival, and for the first time in a long time, the Grand Meridian was exactly what it was meant to be, a place where everyone belonged. The fear had been unmistakable. It hung in the room like morning fog, thick, heavy, clinging to every corner of the staff's consciousness. You could read it in their eyes as they filed into their first meeting with Clara after the incident. Who would be next? What sins might be unearthed from their own past behaviors? But Clara hadn't come with a blade. She came with a notebook and a question. "I want to understand what happened here," she said gently, her voice calm but firm. "Not to assign blame, but to rebuild. Better. Together. Help me understand how we lost our way." What followed wasn't a list of complaints, but a confessional, a collective reckoning. The story they shared was heartbreakingly familiar. Drift. The slow erosion of empathy in favor of efficiency. Leadership that turned a blind eye to cruelty because the numbers still looked good. A toxic status quo disguised as professional standards. And fear. Bryce was popular with some of the managers, admitted Janet Morrison, a server with 3 years behind her apron. If you crossed him, your hours got cut, or you got stuck with the worst sections. It was easier to stay quiet. Clara didn't react with blame or indignation. She simply nodded. "Fear is a failure of management," she said softly. "Not a failure of character. So let's fix the management." What she rolled out wasn't a flavor-of-the-month corporate overhaul. It was practical, measurable, human. Every morning began with a 15-minute huddle where staff shared the best guest interaction from the day before. Good service wasn't buried. It was celebrated. Then she introduced the dignity standard, a single guiding rule. Every guest interaction must leave the person feeling valued. No exceptions, no loopholes. Simple to understand, impossible to ignore. The impact was immediate. and profound. Guest satisfaction scores, which had cratered in recent months, began to rebound. Fast. Online reviews shifted in tone and language. Words like genuine warmth, felt seen, and treated like family began to dominate feedback. Servers began remembering guests' names, preferences, allergies. The breakfast room became a warm hive of genuine hospitality. Every interaction infused with care, not calculation. Marcus, now back in his role as CEO, made it a point to walk the property without warning. No disguises this time, just a watchful eye and a full heart. The reports Clara provided painted a picture he hadn't dared hope for. A team not just surviving a crisis, but rediscovering why they'd joined hospitality in the first place. "It's like watching people fall back in love with their jobs," Clara told him over coffee one afternoon. "When employees are treated with respect and clarity, they pass it on to every guest." Marcus smiled. "A revolutionary idea," he said dryly. The industry buzz was impossible to ignore. Hotel executives from rival chains whispered about the Grand Meridian turnaround. Blogs dissected Clara's training model. Panels quoted her dignity standard at conferences. But the biggest storm surrounded Bryce Morrison himself. The footage of his behavior had gone viral within industry forums. Word spread like wildfire. Hospitality directors began using the clip in trainings, an unflinching case study in what not to do. His name became a cautionary tale, a byword for every hospitality sin. Every job he applied for was met with polite rejection or, in some cases, cold silence. 3 hotel groups contacted Marcus directly to confirm the authenticity of the footage. All 3 walked away. In the end, Bryce had taught the industry a lesson, but not the one he intended. Now, exactly 1 week later, Clara and Marcus stood once again by the breakfast lounge. Same tile floors, same marble counters, same coffee station. And yet, nothing was the same. A young couple in sweatpants approached David, the new breakfast attendant, a recent promotion from housekeeping. Clara watched as David's face lit up with sincerity. "We've got a great tea selection," he said cheerfully, "but if you brought your own, I'd be happy to get you hot water. Whatever helps make your morning perfect." Clara's heart swelled. This was what she'd fought for. Not a punitive reckoning, not viral infamy, but this moment. Quiet, dignified, real. Across the room, David helped an elderly man navigate the menu with patience and gentle humor. "No rush, no judgment. You know," Marcus said beside her, voice low and thoughtful. "I think we've remembered who we are." Clara didn't respond right away. She was too busy taking it all in. The laughter at the omelet station, the casual kindness at the juice bar, the way the servers moved with pride instead of obligation. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with something deeper than victory. "Peace. Now this," she said with certainty, "this is what hospitality looks like." The Grand Meridian hadn't just returned to form. It had found its soul again, and this time it wouldn't lose it.